Hello and welcome back to the channel. Today I'd like to talk about the latest game from Motion Twin, and one I've had the privilege of previewing ahead of its early access launch later this month. So without further delay, I present the next game from the people who brought us Dead Cells, and one I've been dying to play since it was first announced. Before I get started, I'd just like to say thank you to Motion Twin and Guillotine for providing me with review codes. However, this video is not sponsored in any way, and as always my opinions are my own. Also, I should mention that all footage shown is either from a preview build of the game that I captured myself or from the announcement trailer. And with that out of the way, let's get on with the video. Windblown is at its core a fast-paced and gorgeous action roguelite featuring 3-player co-op and some of the most satisfying combat I've ever experienced in an indie game, or any game for that matter. While I'm honestly not a huge fan of Dead Cells, I can say with confidence that I absolutely love Windblown, and that this is one game you do not want to miss. On the face of it, Windblown operates pretty much how you'd expect when it comes to its roguelite elements. You go on expeditions into the Vortex and fight your way through increasingly difficult levels, collecting power-ups and currency until you die, at which point you are sent back to camp where you can spend what resources you've earned on meta progression and upgrades that help you get further on the next run. And on top of that, all of the level layouts along with all of the weapons and abilities you'll acquire along the way are randomized. Like I said, pretty much all of the things you'd expect from a roguelite. However, that's not to downplay just how well thought out all of these systems are, and there's a level of polish to all of it that really demonstrates this team's ability to build on what they learned with Dead Cells. This is especially clear the moment combat starts. I'm not sure I've ever played a game with such a satisfying and finely tuned collection of combat mechanics. And keep in mind, we're talking about the preview build of an indie game that will be launching into early access, but it's honestly just that good. While it's incredibly straightforward and intuitive to pick up, there's also an impressive amount of depth and a ton of room for skill expression. With just 2 weapon slots and 2 trinket slots, which take the form of spells and bombs, they've delivered a shocking amount of variety in the moment-to-moment combat. And the cherry on top is the ability to swap weapons via flashy special moves called alter attacks. Perhaps most impressive though is how seamlessly it all flows together, which brings me to the real highlight and centerpiece of the gameplay, the dash. I don't think it's any exaggeration to say that Windblown is built from the ground up around this insanely fun and satisfying dash mechanic. If you're anything like me and were interested in this game before clicking on this video, I'm willing to bet it's because dashing through the environment simply looks amazing. And I'm happy to report that it feels just as good to use as it looks in trailers. It's so quick that it's really more of a teleport, and will see you zipping between sky islands and the enemies that inhabit them so fast it's almost dizzying. But just like the rest of the game, it's incredibly intuitive to use, feels great, and has a lot of extra layers to discover as you experiment with it and your expanding arsenal of weapons and abilities. The point I really want to drive home before we move on to the next section is that even if the majority of its combat and progression mechanics will be familiar to fans of this genre, their execution is absolutely best in class. And I think that's a real testament to what a talented team can do when iterating on their past work within a new IP. But now, I'd like to talk about the element of Windblown which I think matches the quality of its combat and maybe even surpasses it: the presentation. In all honesty, I wanted to start with the presentation, but figured folks would prefer to know what a game is like before I rant about how beautiful it looks. But yeah, I don't know what to say other than, damn, I mean, look at this game. It has such an incredible vibe and aesthetic that makes every single run an absolute feast for the eyes. I'll talk about this more in a bit, but the build of the game I played and that you've been seeing on screen only gave us access to the first 2 of the 5 biomes that will be available for the early access launch. These 2 areas alone are both so amazing looking and filled with so many little secrets that one of the things I'm most excited for is simply seeing what those other 3 biomes look like. Aside from the levels you'll be fighting through, there's also the village you return to in between runs, which is likewise both charming itself and filled with a charming cast of characters that I'm sure will continue to expand. Now so far, I've just talked about the visuals, but the other half of this game's presentation is its stunning sound design. Every single action is accompanied by a distinct and identifiable sound effect that perfectly captures every dash and attack. The enemy attacks all have sound cues that are just as, if not more, telling than their visual counterparts, and really help you keep track of the organized chaos on screen. But we're still not done, because on top of the incredible sound design and beautiful art style, Windblown also has an absolute banger of a soundtrack. I'm not exaggerating when I say that I still frequently return to the trailers for this game just to listen to the songs featured in them. And so far, the songs I've heard in-game are just as good and deliver the perfect energy for hacking and dashing your way through the levels. And with all that out of the way, I have one more important thing to talk about before I start to wrap things up, and that's the co-op experience. I do think the 3-player co-op is a big part of this game, given that if I had to describe it in really simple terms, I'd say Windblown is like co-op Hades, but with a completely different art style and aesthetic. So then, I'm happy to report that the co-op experience is an absolute blast, and the game scales to both 2-player and 3-player co-op in a way that feels perfectly balanced. Make no mistake, this is a game you can and many people will enjoy entirely solo, but I've personally found that in most cases, roguelite games are far more compelling when played with friends. And I think Windblown really goes the extra mile to make co-op play fun in a way that other games often don't consider. So for example, one of the coolest and most satisfying things to do in Windblown is this awesome little finishing move. But in co-op, they've managed to make it so that if you and your co-op partners all trigger the finishing move at roughly the same time, the attacks will sync up in what is one of the coolest looking and feeling displays I've encountered in a video game. Honestly, for just a split second, it makes you and your friends feel like a little ninja hit squad, and despite happening quite frequently, it never gets old. The other cool thing about co-op is how it avoids the problem with a lot of games where if you and your teammates just keep reviving each other, you'll never really have to worry about losing. In Windblown, when one of your teammates dies, you can only revive them by killing a certain number of enemies. But the catch is that until you do so, you have a sudden death debuff that makes being hit an instant kill. So not only does it prevent you from cheesing fights by just reviving each other, it also creates tension while simultaneously minimizing the amount of time your teammates aren't playing the game. It's a brilliantly straightforward mechanic and co-op solution that I have no doubt will be borrowed by other games in the future. So hopefully by now it's pretty clear that I genuinely love this game and I cannot wait to play more of it. As I said earlier, if there's one point I really want to drive home about Windblown, it's that even if much of it may seem familiar on the surface, it's a perfect example of how something can feel completely fresh and new simply by virtue of being better than what's come before. Nearly all of its mechanics are familiar to me or found in other games, but I rarely have the privilege of playing a game in which every single mechanic feels this polished and refined. And then being able to play it with friends and share that experience just makes it so much more impressive. It may be hard to believe, but I honestly feel like Motion Twin have captured in Windblown the same blend of deep and approachable gameplay with incredible art direction that I used to expect from the likes of Blizzard or Nintendo. Seriously though, huge props to the team, because this game is a stunning achievement of game development and will undoubtedly be making waves in the near future. If after all of that you're as excited as I am for the game's early access launch, then it's your lucky day because before I go, I have all the info you'll need. Well, except for the price, they didn't tell me that. So for starters, Windblown will launch into Steam Early Access on October 24th with what is easily double if not triple the amount of content as the preview build I've been playing. As I mentioned earlier, there's going to be 3 more biomes and something like twice as many weapons and a ton more. And since that's still just early access, the game will obviously continue getting content and updates based on community feedback going forward. But if you're dying to give it a try even sooner, then I have even more good news. There will be a free demo going live on October 10th, and progress from that demo will carry over to the early access version, including an exclusive character. So be sure to check that out, as well as my full early access review of Windblown later this month. Thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and ding the little bell if you want to be notified when my next video goes live. If you'd like to support the channel, you can become a channel member for just a few bucks a month and get a first look at what I'm working on next. Thanks again to everyone at Motion Twin Guillotine and anyone still watching. I'll see you next time.